And thanks for joining me on this episode of Paint Society. My name is Brian, and today we're going to go over the steps of how to prep and paint. So today we have this beautiful 2022 Lexus IS 350. It had a little damage on the top of the door and the bottom. We're going to show you the steps to get it all ready for paint. So here what we're doing is we're using our DEA and 400 grit. Now a lot of guys can go ahead and just block that out. If you don't have any sort of air tools, that would be fine. But since we already blocked out our filler, our primer laid nice and flat, and all we're going to do here is use our 400 grit. Now a lot of guys will not do this, but I like to break open the surface of my panel with 400 grit, which you just saw there in that last clip. Well, by doing this, what this does is it helps open up the clear. So now with our 600 grit, well, the clear is going to be a little bit easier to sand, and that will save you guys on sandpaper as well. Now, when I'm using my P600 grit here, I'm staying away from all of the edges of the panel itself. You don't want to burn through, and a burn through is when you break through to the clear and to the base coat. And if you burn through to the base coat, you're going to need to reapply base coat to that edge. And why is this a problem? Well, because no two colors are ever the same, you're going to have to blend and paint the next panel if you burn through on the edge. Now, in some cases, in some colors, you can use some techniques and tricks to, well, hide the color, but just as a good rule of thumb, do not use the air sander at the edge. So you can see I am just lightly going over all of my panels, and you don't want any shine on the panel. By knocking off the shine, our paint is going to stick, and also we're smoothing out the panel so that the paint will lay flat. A lot of guys just don't understand that the smoother the panel, well, the better the paint job. You can see here we're using a soft sponge. And the reason why I like this soft sanding sponge is because it's still firm enough that you can use it in these tight little areas. And these will be the first areas that will peel. And this is why we like to remove every single part that is on the vehicle, because we can sand behind it. Now, if we don't do this, eventually what will happen is you'll have peeling underneath all of these areas. You can see by hand, I'm using this sanding sponge, and what we're doing is we're controlling our sanding. Now on these Lexuses, these cars are notorious for having the sharpest body lines with the least amount of paint on them. And you will break through very easily, but by doing it by hand, you really minimize the chance of breaking through. Now, you could obviously do this whole thing by hand, but remember, when you're using sandpaper by hand, it's gonna have a tougher scratch. So also keep that in mind, that you might want to up the grit if you're doing this by hand. So maybe if you're doing by hand, an 800 grit instead of the 600. You can see here we're just finishing everything off, and make sure you blow everything off so we can see, hey, is there any more shiny spots? And then this would be a good time to go back. Now you can also use a maroon scuff pad from 3M, a flex pad, and that will be similar to what we're doing here. Now, next step, I'm going to wash and clean the panel with the degreaser. And a lot of painters do not do this just because they don't have the time that I do. But since I have a little bit more time, since we're not a high production shop, I'm going to use every single resource I have to do a good job. Remember, the more time you spend smoothing out that clear coat and cleaning, the better the finish. No fish eyes, no lint, no dirt, none of that. So I'm using a basic degreaser here. Any degreaser will work with some water, and I'm using my maroon scuff pad. Then we'll go ahead and we'll wash it down. Now, another reason why this just takes much longer is the drying time. It's not actually the time it takes to wash down the panel, but you'll have to dry the whole panel down, and the whole vehicle actually will need to be dry as well, because if you cover it with plastic, well, that plastic and water, once it dries, it can leave markings on the vehicle that you will have to buff off. Now we've got the vehicle in the paint booth, and you can see that I'm always cleaning every step of the way. It's so important to have a clean surface. Just in general, as a person, I'm a clean person no matter what. If you look into my vehicle, if you look into my home, or if you look into my workstation, everything is clean. And you need to follow those same types of techniques so that you can have a better end product. because the panel being dirty has nothing to do with things falling into it from your atmosphere. It has more to do with the type of work you have done from the point of starting on that panel to the time it enters wherever you're spraying. Are you clean? Did you wash the panel down? Is the areas around the panel clean? That is what will affect the panel and the cleanliness of how it comes out. We can see here we got it all masked up, and I like to pull it tight from front to back. You can see I cut the plastic off the back, and that enables you to pull it tight from all four corners and then tie it up in the middle. So that's going to help out with the cleanliness also of the actual panel itself. Now what we're going to be using here first is a water-based cleaner. You can see I'm using a microfiber rag, and sometimes you'll see me use a prep rag, but I do prefer to use a microfiber rag. The reason why I like a microfiber rag is because it pulls more of the contaminants and the dust off of the surface. You might remember seeing before we washed down the car all that white powder that, well, was completely removed. Well, this will further remove that white powder from the sand scratches and make sure that we don't have any sort of contamination. And when you think you're done drying, keep on drying and keep on cleaning. You can never clean too much. Oh yeah, and another step, you see I'm wearing gloves. If you're not wearing gloves while you're cleaning the vehicle, well, you might as well not be cleaning at all, because what happens is those contaminants will just go right back on the surface, whether it's from your skin or whatever you touched earlier. It can transfer right back onto the panel. So at this point, there should be no physical contact with the panel that has to do with any of your skin cells. Nothing should touch the panel. So we're going to be using our DV1 for our base, and we're using a clear base coat. We're using the B+ air cap, and the B+ air cap just means that it is for water base. Now we have Sicken solvent, and we're using an extra slow reducer today to really help smooth out that blend. Now the reason why I put the blending additive is more for a visual aid to see how well my blend is looking. Since the whole panel is dull, sometimes it's tough to see how well the blend is going to look. So I put on this blending additive because it has the same sheen as the base coat when it dries. And I'll go ahead and I'll put in the description a blending additive that you can use as well. It has a few different names like Inner Coat Clear, and well, it's definitely going to help you out. You can see we're using our Sickens here to get our base coat mixed up, and well, we're ready to blend. 2 coats on a black primer is all you will need, and I like to follow the X pattern. Now on the DV1 and only this gun, you're going to spray it around 14 to 15 psi. The reason why I like this gun is because it doesn't have a lot of overspray, and we're using a low pressure, and what that's going to help us do is minimize the repair area, so we're not going to have all that overspray on either side of the panel. One of the toughest things in the automotive paint industry is doing a blend smack dab right in the middle of a door. That is one of the most difficult jobs to do. But we're going to make sure it looks good. We're using our Astro Sunlight gun, and you can see towards the left side it's a little bit cloudy, and don't worry about that. That's just the scuffed up clear. Earlier in my career, I thought that was a problem, and I would have to go back and put base over it, thinking that it was going to be cloudy once it was cleared, and that is just the scuffed up clear, making it look that way. Now you can see we're using our tack rag not that often. We used it before we put down our blending additive, and we used it after our base coat. And we're using our DV1 clear coat gun with a 1.3, and we're using it around 20 psi. Now the temperatures in the booth were around 72 degrees, a rather cool night in sunny South Florida, and that paint was coming out absolutely stunning. The paint we're using here is the UTEC Select Clear, which is a phenomenal, beautiful clear. A little bit on a thicker end, so it's going to stick and hold right where you put it. In real time, you can see that the finish looks fantastic, and you don't want to hammer it on our first coat. Although it does look pretty slick here, we want to make sure we don't get any runs in any of our coats. So about 10 minutes later, we're ready for the second coat. Now what I like to do is I start from the bottom and I move to the top, and there's a debate as to what works better, but personally for me, I like to start from the bottom. This really helps me so I don't get any sort of dry spray, And I like to spray it when there's no overspray in the air so I can really see what I'm doing. Now, research shows or doesn't show it really if there's any difference, and some people will claim there's a big difference and some people will say it doesn't matter. What I'm telling you, personally for me, it hasn't made any difference, and it works better for me from bottom to top just because of my spraying technique. So after this second coat is all done, it's looking fantastic, and it came out super clean using the processes and procedures that we showed here earlier in the video. We only had 2 pieces of dirt, and one is right over here, it's very, very tiny, and one towards the front mirror, which will show you how we buffed it out and made it look completely OEM. So a project like this, we just let air dry. I have completely gotten away from the bake cycle. The bake does work, but sometimes it can introduce problems. So we allowed this to dry overnight. We came back in the morning and we're ready to take it all apart and start to get it buffed and reassembled. You can see here that the color looks fantastic and beautiful, especially for a beautiful brand new Lexus. Your work has to be on the money every time. Fresh out the booth, and there's nothing like seeing a color that matches as soon as you bring it outside. Now what we're using here is the Toll Cut 2000. Very, very, very least aggressive in this manner. We don't want to go too much. We don't want to start off with 1,000 or 1,200. These are just very small little dust nibs. And what the block does, since it's so dense, is it really just knocks the top of the nib off. So you don't have to worry about it being a rounded polish booger as you may tend to see it as after it's polished. You know, you want to make sure you completely cut it flat. So after that's done, I like to feel it with my hands because this really shows me, you know, is it cut flat? Is there anything else that needs to be sanded? Now here we're using our 3000 on the 3-inch. And this is all you'll need to do for something just like this. Once again, I'm feeling it just to make sure that there's completely no other sanding areas or any high spots or low spots. So I like to go with a least aggressive manner when polishing, especially black. So this is a swirl remover from Turbo Wax, and it is what I've been using probably for the last 8 months, and it really works well. You can see I'm using, you know, Milwaukee mini buffer, and we're using that step 1 pad with it, and I'm using this just to, you know, get that shine back. And this can sometimes create buffer trails, and we're going to show you here in a moment how we get rid of those. So you're going to have to go over it 2 or 3 times with putting some more of that swirl remover down. And the swirl remover is not too aggressive. It's not like a compound. It might take a little bit longer, but you're not going to have to chase all of the buffer marks as much with it. And another thing I like about it is that it really doesn't dust that much. So when you're buffing it, it doesn't dry up and it doesn't sling all over the car. This is completely annoying, especially when you've just washed the car and there might be 1 or 2 spots that you just need to go over. So what we're here using is the Gyrat's Garage polisher. And this polisher is that dual action polisher. And this is in a least aggressive manner. We're just going to be going over those areas just to make sure that there's no buffer trails, and that gets handled really quick. And it's time for the assembly. So I really did hope you enjoyed this video. And if you could take anything from this video, just understand that it's not so much in the paint as it is the preparation of the panel itself. If the panel is not prepared properly, your paint will never look good, okay? A painter can only work with so much, and as long as the substrate underneath is prepared properly, then you're gonna have the best possible chance of laying down a clean paint job. In a production setting, we do not have time to buff orange peel or buff a whole bunch of dirt, nibs, or anything like that. So we wanna make sure we have the cleanest jobs possible, and so it matches the OEM texture. Now, before the car goes out to the customer, it gets washed, but I like to give it my own little quick cleaning just to make sure that there's no debris or no dust anywhere where I was working, and there's absolutely no trace of where I have been with the vehicle. And once it's all done, it really looks fantastic. I hope you guys learned something from this video, and you're gonna start prepping and painting like a pro once you put these techniques to try on your own project. This is Brian from Paint Society reminding you, don't overthink it, it's just paint. I'll see you guys on the next episode.